The hum of Tokyo lingered beyond the thin walls of room 302. Trains slid past in the distance, their rhythm weaving through the muffled sounds of the city below. Inside, the small apartment held its own kind of quiet, not peaceful, but heavy, as if the air itself carried the weight of words left unspoken. Aiko Tanaka folded laundry in the narrow living room, her fingers moving automatically, her mind elsewhere. Since her husband's death a year ago, every evening had felt the same. The television murmured softly in the background, showing a cooking show she barely watched. Across the room, a small pink backpack rested near the door, untouched since Hannah came home from school. Her daughter had barely said a word that evening. Aiko had noticed, just as she noticed every day now, how Hannah avoided eye contact, how she ate in silence, how her laughter had faded into memory. There had been a time when Hannah's giggles filled this apartment, echoing down the hallway like sunlight. Now, her silence was louder than anything else. "Hannah," Aiko called gently. "It's time for bed." No reply. Aiko sighed, placing the folded towel on the couch before walking to her daughter's room. The door stood slightly open. She pushed it wider, the faint scent of cherry blossom fabric softener drifting out. Hannah was already in bed, her small figure turned toward the wall, the blanket pulled up to her chin. "You forgot to brush your teeth again," Aiko said softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. The child didn't move. Her breathing was slow, steady, perhaps pretending to be asleep. Aiko brushed a strand of hair from Hannah's face. The faint light from the corridor illuminated her daughter's delicate features, pale skin, long lashes, the faint shadow under her eyes. Aiko hesitated. She wanted to speak, to ask what was wrong, to bridge that invisible distance, but the words never came. Instead, she whispered, "Good night, Hannah," and kissed her forehead. She turned off the light and closed the door quietly. The apartment sank back into its muted stillness. Hours passed. The city outside dimmed, and only the ticking clock and the hum of the refrigerator remained. Aiko lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts restless. It was then she heard it, a faint sound from Hannah's room. A shuffle. A soft thud. Her heart tightened. She waited, listening. Nothing followed. Perhaps Hannah had just rolled over. Still, something about the sound unsettled her. The way it had paused, deliberate, almost cautious. She rose quietly, her bare feet brushing the cool floor. Standing by the door of Hannah's room, she listened again. Silence. She turned the knob slowly and peered inside. The moonlight spilled through the curtain, casting pale shapes across the bed. Hannah lay still, her back facing the door. Everything seemed normal, but Aiko's gaze lingered. The blanket looked oddly shaped near the pillow. She stepped closer, her breath shallow. She almost reached out to adjust the blanket, but then stopped herself. It felt wrong to disturb her. Maybe she was just being paranoid again. Aiko exhaled and retreated, closing the door gently. As she returned to her room, a strange thought crossed her mind, fleeting but sharp. For a moment, she remembered the kitchen drawer earlier that day. One of the small knives had been missing. She had assumed she misplaced it while cooking. The thought faded as she lay back down, but unease settled deep in her chest, refusing to let her sleep. Outside, Tokyo whispered through the night. Inside room 302, two hearts, one restless, one afraid, lay in silence. Morning sunlight crept through the blinds, tracing thin golden lines across the small apartment. The smell of rice and miso soup filled the air as Aiko stood in the kitchen, stirring absently. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep. The night's unease clung to her like a shadow that refused to leave. She glanced toward the table where Hannah sat quietly, her small hands clutching a pencil. The child's hair was still messy from sleep, and she hadn't said a single word since waking up. In front of her lay a piece of drawing paper, half covered with soft, hesitant strokes. "What are you drawing, sweetheart?" Aiko asked gently, setting a bowl in front of her. Hannah didn't look up. She mumbled something that Aiko couldn't catch. "Say it again, darling." Hannah's voice was almost a whisper. "Papa." Aiko froze. The word lingered between them, fragile and sharp. She hadn't heard Hannah mention her father's name in months. Slowly, she leaned closer to see the drawing. It showed a figure, tall, faceless, standing beside a smaller child beneath a dark sky. In the child's hand was something small, a shape that might have been a knife, or perhaps a toy. The pencil lines were uncertain, trembling. Aiko's heart tightened. That's lovely, Hannah. Papa would be proud. But Hannah didn't answer. She only pressed harder with the pencil, darkening the outline until it almost tore through the paper. Aiko forced a smile, though her stomach turned. Eat before it gets cold, okay? She turned back to the counter, reaching for a dishcloth. Her gaze flicked instinctively toward the utensil drawer, the one where she kept the kitchen knives. A chill ran through her. She opened it. One knife, the small one she'd used for fruit, was still missing. Her pulse quickened. Perhaps it had fallen behind the counter? Or maybe she had misplaced it in the drying rack. She checked each space, her hands trembling slightly. No knife. Hannah, she said carefully. Did you see the small kitchen knife? The one with the blue handle? The child didn't reply. Hannah. Still nothing. The sound of the pencil stopped. Aiko turned. Hannah was staring at her, not with anger, but with something else. Something unreadable. No, Hannah said at last, her tone soft but distant. Maybe it's gone. Aiko tried to smile again, though her throat felt tight. Maybe. She gathered the bowls and placed them in the sink, her movements mechanical. The morning passed in uneasy silence, the kind that made the ticking clock sound too loud. Hannah packed her backpack and put on her shoes without being told, as if eager to leave. Before stepping out, she turned to Aiko. Can I sleep in your room tonight? The question caught her off guard. Why, dear? You have your own bed. Hannah looked down at the floor. I just don't like mine. Aiko hesitated. We'll see, all right? The girl nodded, then slipped her small hand into Aiko's for a brief moment before pulling away and walking toward the lift. As the door closed, Aiko stood still, her hand tingling where Hannah had touched her. There was warmth there, but also something colder. Something that felt like fear. When she returned to the kitchen, she glanced once more at the drawing on the table. This time, she noticed what she had missed before. Behind the tall, faceless figure, faintly sketched, was a bed. And under the pillow, a thin outline of the missing knife. Rain began to fall that evening, soft and rhythmic against the narrow window panes of room 302. Tokyo glimmered beneath the drizzle, neon lights bending in puddles along the street below. Aiko sat on the sofa, her laptop open but untouched. She had tried to focus on work, but her thoughts kept circling back to Hannah's drawing, to the missing knife, and to that quiet, distant look in her daughter's eyes. She sighed and looked toward Hannah's closed bedroom door. A faint line of light glowed from beneath it. It was late, too late for a 7-year-old to still be awake. Aiko rose, her bare feet brushing the tatami floor, and knocked gently. Hannah, are you still up? No answer. She turned the handle and peeked inside. Hannah was sitting cross-legged on her bed, her small hands gripping the edge of her blanket. Her eyes were fixed on the window, where the rain traced crooked lines of silver. Hannah, Aiko said softly. It's bedtime, darling. The child didn't move. Her voice came low, distant. There's someone outside. Aiko frowned. Outside? Sweetheart, we're on the 3rd floor. There's no one there. Hannah shook her head. I heard him. He said my name. Aiko walked to the window, drawing the curtain back slightly. Only the wet reflection of the city stared back. It's just the wind, she said, forcing calm into her voice. Nothing more. Hannah's small hands tightened around the blanket. He comes when I sleep. That's why I keep it. Aiko turned, puzzled. Keep what? But Hannah only lowered her gaze, her lips pressed tight. The unease returned, creeping through Aiko's chest. She smiled gently, trying to soothe the air between them. All right, my love. No more scary thoughts. You can sleep in my room tonight if you like. Hannah's eyes lifted, uncertain. Can I bring my pillow? Aiko hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded. Of course. Later that night, the two of them lay side by side in Aiko's small bedroom. The rain had eased to a drizzle, and the faint hum of traffic filled the quiet. Hannah was already drifting towards sleep, her breathing soft and uneven. Aiko brushed a hand through her daughter's hair. The pillow beneath Hannah's head felt firmer than usual. She thought of asking about it, but something in her daughter's peaceful face stopped her. Maybe she was overthinking. Maybe it was only a folded blanket or a toy. She closed her eyes, telling herself she would check in the morning. But sleep never came easily. Around midnight, Aiko stirred, her senses half awake. She thought she heard something, a faint metallic sound. It came again, sharper this time. Her eyes opened. The room was dim, painted with moonlight. Hannah was sitting upright beside her, her head slightly turned toward the window. In her hand, the edge of something glimmered faintly in the silver light. Aiko froze, her breath caught in her throat. Hannah, she whispered. What are you doing? The girl turned slowly, her eyes wide and glassy with fear. He's here, she murmured. He wants to come in? Aiko reached out carefully, her heart pounding. Sweetheart, give that to me. It's all right. You're safe. But Hannah shook her head, clutching the knife close to her chest, the blade trembling in her small hand. He said he'll take you too, Mama. Aiko's blood ran cold. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. She reached for her daughter again, but the child shrank back, pressing herself against the wall. Don't let him in, Hannah whispered. Please don't let him in. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the window, and for a split second, Aiko thought she saw a faint shadow move across the glass, though she couldn't tell if it was real or just the reflection of fear in her own eyes. She pulled Hannah close, wrapping her arms around her trembling body. No one's here, she whispered. No one will take us. I promise. But deep inside, Aiko wasn't sure if she believed her own words. Morning light spilled weakly through the curtains, painting pale streaks across the floor. Aiko woke to the soft rhythm of Hannah's breathing beside her. The knife was gone. Her heart thudded as she searched the sheets with trembling fingers. Nothing. She lifted the pillow. Still nothing. Hannah slept soundly, her face calm, almost angelic, as though the night before had been only a dream. Aiko rose quietly, stepping to the kitchen. The drawer was open. The missing knife had returned to its place, resting neatly among the others. For a long time she stood there, unsure whether to feel relief or dread. When Hannah woke, she seemed cheerful, humming softly as she ate her breakfast. Aiko wanted to ask, but the words caught in her throat. She didn't want to frighten her again. As Hannah left for school, Aiko leaned on the counter and let out a slow breath. Her reflection stared back at her from the small kitchen window, pale, tired, uncertain. For a moment, she thought she saw something move behind her reflection, a faint blur of a man's outline, but when she turned, the room was empty. That night, she locked the window and checked every door twice. 2 days passed without incident. Then, one afternoon, Aiko's phone rang while she was at work. The display showed an unfamiliar number. Tanaka-san? This is Nakamura from Hannah's school, the voice said. I wanted to discuss something concerning your daughter. Aiko's stomach tightened. Is she all right? She is fine physically. But her homeroom teacher found a drawing today that concerned us. What kind of drawing? A picture of you, and another of a man standing outside a window. There was also something that looked like a knife. When we asked, she said she drew what she saw. Aiko's pulse quickened. She thanked the teacher, promised to come by the next morning, and hung up with shaking hands. That evening, Hannah was quiet again, sitting by the window with her sketchbook open. Who is the man you draw, Hannah? Aiko asked carefully. Hannah looked up, her eyes steady but far away. He's waiting. For what? To come in. Aiko forced a small laugh. Darling, there's no one there. You just miss Papa, don't you? But Hannah didn't smile. Papa doesn't talk anymore, Mama. He just watches. Aiko's skin went cold. She reached to close the sketchbook. No more scary drawings, all right? Hannah nodded, but her eyes drifted back to the dark window, where the reflection of the city lights shimmered like restless ghosts. That night, the rain returned. It came harder than before, drumming against the metal railing of the small balcony. Aiko sat awake, unable to sleep. Every few minutes, she glanced toward Hannah's room, afraid of what she might see. At midnight, she heard a sound, a creak, faint but clear, from the balcony door. She froze, listening. The latch rattled once, twice. She moved quickly, her heart racing. The lock was still in place, but the thin curtain swayed as though someone had brushed past them. When she turned around, Hannah was standing there. Her white nightdress clung to her small frame, her hair tangled. "Mama," she whispered. "He's outside again." Aiko dropped to her knees, holding her daughter close. "There's no one there, Hannah. I promise you." But Hannah shook her head. "He said he'll come inside soon. He said he'll bring Papa back." Tears welled in Aiko's eyes. "Sweetheart, Papa's gone. He's not coming back." Hannah buried her face in her mother's shoulder. "Then, why does he still knock?" Outside, the wind howled, and somewhere within the storm, there came a soft, deliberate tap against the glass. The next morning, Aiko decided to look through her late husband's belongings. She needed to understand what haunted her daughter. She opened an old shoebox from the top of the wardrobe, photographs, receipts, an old watch. Among them, a picture caught her attention. It showed her husband standing on that very balcony, smiling faintly, his hand resting on the railing. Behind him, reflected in the glass door, was a small dark blur, shaped almost like a man. She stared at it, her chest tightening. Perhaps it was just a trick of the light, but something about the angle, the shadow, felt wrong. Hannah entered quietly. "That's him," she said, pointing at the reflection. "That's who waits outside." Aiko's throat went dry. "Hannah, where did you see him first?" "In my room. The night Papa didn't wake up." The memory hit her like a cold wind. That night, the ambulance, the flashing lights, Hannah crying in her arms. She had told herself her daughter had been asleep. Perhaps she had not. Aiko hugged her tightly. "You're safe now," she whispered. "Nothing can hurt you." But Hannah's voice trembled. "He doesn't want to hurt me, Mama. He wants you." It was late when Aiko heard it again. A single, soft knock. Then another. She stood in the living room, the city lights flickering beyond the rain-streaked glass. The sound came from Hannah's room. She opened the door slowly. Hannah sat upright on her bed, her pillow clutched to her chest. The knife lay beside her, glinting faintly in the dim light. Aiko's voice broke. "Hannah, please give it to me." "He's angry," Hannah whispered. "He said you left him." Aiko stepped closer. "Hannah, listen to me. That's not Papa. Whatever you think you see, it's not him." The window shuddered. The curtain billowed inward, though the glass was closed. Hannah screamed and dropped the knife. Aiko caught her in her arms as the light flickered and went out. For a moment, everything was still, only the sound of their breathing in the dark. Then came another knock, louder this time, right against the window pane. Aiko spent the following day in a daze. She called in sick, unable to leave the apartment. Hannah stayed close to her side, silent and pale. By afternoon, Aiko made a decision. She would move. Leave Tokyo, leave this apartment, start again somewhere else. But first, she needed to prove to herself that there was nothing here, no ghost, no presence, only grief wearing a darker face. That evening, she sat with Hannah and read old bedtime stories aloud. The girl's eyelids grew heavy, and soon she drifted into sleep. When Aiko stood to turn off the light, she saw the pillow had shifted slightly. She lifted it. The knife was gone again. Her pulse surged. She turned toward the balcony door. It was open. The curtain fluttered softly in the cold wind. She stepped forward. Rain wet her feet. The air smelled of rust and city smoke. Then she saw him. For a heartbeat, a figure stood at the edge of the balcony. Tall, blurred, familiar. The face she once loved, twisted by distance and grief. "Aiko," the wind seemed to whisper. She stumbled back, slamming the door shut. The lock clicked, the glass rattled once more, and the shadow was gone. Behind her, Hannah stood in the doorway, wide-eyed. You saw him too. Aiko could only nod, trembling. The storm broke at dawn. Pale light crept through the curtains, washing the room in silver. Aiko sat on the floor beside Hannah's bed, the knife now locked away in the drawer, the pillow replaced with a clean one. Hannah stirred and opened her eyes. Is he gone? She asked softly. Aiko brushed a hand over her daughter's hair. Yes, darling. He's gone. The girl looked uncertain, but she nodded and turned toward the window. For the first time in weeks, she smiled, small, tentative like sunlight after rain. Aiko rose and opened the curtains. Tokyo shimmered beyond the glass, bright and ordinary, as if the night had never happened. Yet when she glanced at the balcony, something caught her breath. On the wet railing lay the old wristwatch her husband used to wear, ticking faintly despite the rust. Aiko stared at it for a long moment. Then she closed the window and turned back to Hannah. Come on, sweetheart, she said quietly. Let's have breakfast. Hannah slipped her small hand into her mother's. Together, they walked toward the kitchen, leaving room 302 filled with a silence that, at last, felt almost peaceful.